Alright, we're going to go ahead and install these two video cards into the loop and into the motherboard itself. And we're also going to connect them. Now you can use a water block or a water block spacer tube, and you can connect these cards in a few different ways. We're just going to use a single tube to connect them. And to do so, we're going to go ahead and take the tube and insert it onto the compression fitting, and go ahead and put one side of our compression fitting on. Make sure it's nice and tight. We're going to go ahead and attach that to one of the video cards. Go ahead and insert it. Make sure it's nice and snug as well. Then we're going to go ahead and flip it so the block is facing down so we don't damage the connection into the motherboard. It also is a little bit more solid when you push them together. Now a nice thing to do is to go ahead and put these two pieces together onto the tubing itself first. That way it's nice and spaced out, makes this part easier. We're going to go ahead and slide the two of them together, giving a nice good grip on both. We don't want to bend these cards. Put them face up and then just wiggle them until that tube gets nice and tight. And then we can go ahead and insert our opposite side of the compression fitting. Sure, get our thread started here properly. There we go. Give it a nice good crank and make sure it's nice and tight as well. Now we have both of our video cards connected. We're going to go ahead and insert them into the motherboard. Now, the easiest way to do this is to go ahead and lay your case on its side. So you can see we've already installed the motherboard. You should have the basic understanding of how to put a computer together. Go ahead and put them parallel to each other. Fit them into the correct slide. Now you want to make sure these are put into the slots right on top of each other. I put this one in just a little bit off to the side, so we're just going to go ahead and pull it out. Make sure we get them both nice and centered. On top of their slots. Then we can go ahead and insert them and snap them in place, just like you'd do a normal video card insertion. So now we're going to talk about connecting into the loop. So I already have my radiators in and our CPU and RAM block. We'll talk about the way the loop's laid out in just a few seconds. We're going to talk about cutting the tubing to fit. I'm not going to show you connecting every piece of tubing, every fitting in this. That'd waste a lot of time and probably bore the crap out of everybody. So what we're going to talk about is how I cut everything to fit. Now I have this XSPC pipe cutting tool. This thing works awesome. So I'm going to connect it on one end. I'm going to pull it nice and tight because this is where I want it to be. I want it to look like this. So I'm going to cut it right here, right where my finger's at. I've measured it to the very bottom of the compression fitting where I want it to sit in. So now I've cut it to be the right length. I'm just going to double check the measurement. Now we're going to go ahead and insert it on top of it. Wiggle it back and forth. It can be a little tricky to get these on. Now, one thing that happens a lot when you're using compression fitting is you forget to put the actual compression portion on. So make sure you do that first. I'm going to insert this portion onto the tubing. Now we can go ahead and insert it onto the barb. Make sure you support whatever you're putting it onto. It does take a lot of force to insert it on. You're going to want to wiggle it back and forth. Now if you have it connected, you're going to have to do this in smaller wiggles and maybe pull a little bit of slack down. You want to make sure you're not damaging any of your components, but the tubing's pretty flexible and you can get it to about where you want it to go. Once it's where you want it, you're going to go ahead and screw this fitting down, and now you have this connected into your loop. Just make sure everything's nice and tight. And one thing that you don't want to forget to do, and you should do this on every single fitting, is make sure that they are nice and tight. They don't have to be extremely snug. You don't want to strip anything out, but you want to make sure that you've got them tightened. So use a wrench with some tape on it, help it not scratch. Now there's a gazillion different ways you can set your loop up. I used almost a pump reservoir combo. So you can see my reservoirs off to the right hand side. The pump is what's underneath it. We're going to talk about the way that this loop is set up. So we have our two reservoirs here and our two video cards, our RAM block, CPU, and the motherboard block. Now I've went ahead and mounted the reservoirs on here. So this first line here, this first tube, is going to come out, pump out, up into the first video card, through the loop, up this tube, and into our radiator up here at the top. Second tube is going to come through, pump into our RAM block, into the CPU block. Make sure it's the center portion. From the CPU block into the main block. And then into the radiator up here at the top of the machine. So here's what the top of the machine looks like. We have our two parts coming in to the radiator. It's going to move through the radiator, get cooled by the fans on either side, and then come out of the radiator, back down into the reservoir. Now I'm going to use a top inlet port on these. I understand that a lot of people are against this, but as long as your flow is not extremely crazy, you're going to be just fine. And I think it looks a little bit more aesthetically pleasing in this build than putting it all the way back down towards the bottom inlet. So you can see this is how I filled it in. Now I did this really basic. All I had to do was put in the portion of the tube on one side, measure it out, make the bends, everything the way that I want it to look, cut it, and put it on and put the compression fitting on. So this portion wasn't hard. It was actually just more time consuming than anything. The next step is to go ahead and fill those reservoirs and turn this loop on. I'll throw that video down in the description. Thanks for watching this one.